Finding Common Battlegrounds is an attempt by two brothers, one conservative, the other progressive, to have civil conversations about politics with a little help from their friends.
Hey everyone, welcome to Finding Common Battlegrounds again. So again, we have Josh and Ryan Cragen. We are going to be discussing a subject and seeing what kind of common ground we can find on each of these points. We take each week we're gonna take a political point and we're gonna discuss it and come up with some common areas that we agree on, both from a liberal and a conservative perspective. So just to get to know Josh and Ryan a little bit more, they are brothers, but I'm gonna we're just gonna talk briefly about your religious ideology. So Ryan, tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. So all three of us grew up in Utah, LDS. I left the religion in 2020. Sorry, not 2020, 2001?
2001, 2002?
2002, I think, is actually when I formally left. And pretty quickly thereafter became non-religious. So I don't have a religious affiliation. And then as far as kind of what I do believe, I could identify as a humanist. I am, in fact, a dues-paying member of the Satanic Temple, which is loads of fun. We should have a great conversation about who they are and what they do, because that is awesome.
How much are the dues?
$25 to join.
That's a year?
No, done. But
One
you can
time.
continue to pay. But I could actually pull out my card if you want to see it. Because
It's a small price to pay to go to hell.
I thought they'd take.
Was awesome. So,
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's very briefly about me. But this is again something that I study. So lots of fun.
Sorry, can't take you. You haven't paid your dues. Okay,
Get my
Josh.
card out.
Satan's a real stickler on those dues.
Josh, you're up.
My turn. I'm the opposite of Ryan. Grew up in Utah. That's ridiculous.
There it is. Oh, nice.
Satanic Temple, dues-paying member, right there.
Wow. Good luck with that. Opposite of Ryan. Grew up in Utah. Member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Grew up that way. Stayed that way. And I'm happy with it. It's it's good. You should all do it. You shouldn't join the satanic cults.
You should
come get baptized.
Totally join the Satanic Temple.
It's cheaper. Awesome. It's definitely cheaper to join the satanic cult. No doubt about that. Probably less time involved, but
far more entertaining. Just saying.
Okay, so let's move on to this week's subject. This week's subject, we are going to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement. So the question is, did the 2020 BLM protests, riots ultimately help African Americans? And so I'm just going to go through a little statement, give a little background, and then everyone's going to give their points and go back and forth. So, so this is from the Wikipedia page, from the BLM Wikipedia page. So Black Lives Matter actually started in July. The hashtag first showed up in July 2013. Really became a movement in 2014 when George Zimmerman, his acquittal. So he was acquitted of the death of Trayvon Martin, so there was some protests then. Then it kind of there were some subsequent protests when Michael Brown and Eric Garner were both killed. And so Ferguson and New York City, and there were a lot of the Ferguson protests were the more known protests. And then again, in 2020, there was a massive movement when George Floyd was killed by Officer Derek Chauvin. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Chauvin.
Yeah. Yep.
And so they said estimated 15 to 26 million people participated in the Black Lives Matter protests, making it one of the largest movements in the country's history. And then just one other statement here. So in The Guardian, according So in The Guardian, as of October 31st, 2020, 25 people have died from the protests and riots. So 11 have been killed while participating in political demonstrations, and 14 more have been killed in other incidences linked to political unrest this summer, including 7 shot during alleged looting of businesses. So, so there was some violence and some rioting that stemmed from those protests. And I'll just make one last point, that some people are taking that. I have seen people defend that, right? And there have been cases made of like, hey, the Tea Party protests, and those were basically riots, and those were done to try to get attention and to move things politically. So I've seen people defend that, and then that was okay. And I'm not saying yes or no that it was good or bad, but I want to know, did they get the outcome that they wanted? Was this movement ultimately good for the African American population? So I'm going to go to Ryan, if you want to start. So I'm going to do 3 minutes. If you want to just give a basic overview of your points and just kind of defend where you stand on it, and then we'll give Josh a shot at.
So like the overall position that I'm going to take, and then we'll do the specific points later. Yeah,
exactly.
So my overall point would be that, or response to the specific question, is that I do think the protests, and I'm putting a lot of emphasis on protests, right, did effectuate change. The change is limited. I don't think it's gone as far as it probably needs to. But it hasn't, in fact, effectuated change. Specific changes include things like different cities banning chokeholds and strangleholds by their police officers, right? So that has actually happened. In my city specifically, in Tampa, they were on the edge about getting police officers body cameras. And these protests over the summer actually formally pushed them over the edge, and they decided to do it. So a number of cities and police forces have decided to get body cameras, right? That's another thing that the movement wanted, right? And obviously it's raised attention. So in that way, it's clearly been effective. And there have been some other changes as well. One of the big ones that I think has been underplayed in the news, and I'll wrap up on this, then we can get to specific points later, is yes, there was the whole movement called defund the police, which I think was absurd. It was a terrible name for it. I'm not agreeing with the name, but to change how police officers respond, particularly in mental health crises. So rather than sending police officers who are not trained mental health experts, they're sending social workers in some cities now. And I think that's a brilliant change, right? So I think there have been some really positive outcomes and changes that have resulted from the protests that took place basically during the summer of 2020. So my position would be, yes, it has, in some very specific ways, helped the cause, right, and effectuated change. That would be my take on it.
So the cause, the BLM cause, but do you think it helped African Americans? Or do you think by virtue of helping the cause, it helps them?
I don't know what that means.
Okay.
An evasion, because this speaks to the whole problem with, well, not the whole problem. I'm being too critical there. But part of the problem with the movement is you're afraid to talk about it.
I am afraid to talk about the movement.
That in and of itself should tell us that there's an issue here.
Mm-hmm.
Name me one time in history where people afraid to talk about something has been good for the populace at large. That's crazy. But we're getting off topic. You don't have to.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tom.
Are you good, Ryan? Anything else you want to add?
No. Let Josh give his broad overview, and then we'll get specific points of agreement.
Okay. All right, Josh.
I don't get to counter what he just said.
Well, you can put into your argument.
All right. So I'll give you the other side of the defund of the police movement, because that was irrefutably part of the Black Lives Matter movement, right? Is this whole defund the police thing. There are several cities that did defund the police. They took millions out of the budget of police officers and their police departments. And what we've seen now is a rise in crime in a lot of these cities, in most of the cities that defunded their police. We've seen crazy uptick in violent crime this year. So your points, I agree with your points about the training for the police officers. But here's, I was listening to a podcast, and this guy pointed out that soldiers, when they go off to war, they train for months and months before their deployment. And then when they get there, they're still training to, for whatever it is they're going to do, for hand-to-hand combat, to disarm people or shooting people or whatever they're training to do. They train for months and months to do it. And then they get deployed for a couple months, and then they come home. Police officers, on average, police departments across the U.S., they train 1, maybe 2 days a year on hand-to-hand combat, on how to disarm somebody with their hands. And we're going to train them less and defund them less. That's a huge problem. And that is the defunded police movement. I like your point about how they sent the social workers in when it's necessary, but you can't send a social worker in when somebody's shooting up a school. That's not gonna work, right? So I'm mostly addressing your point, but my overall point is, as Tom said, people died as a direct result of these riots. Yes. Yes. You agree with that?
I mean,
that's not good. Many of those people were black that died. Okay. As a direct result of the riots, many minority neighborhoods were burned down. Most of the places where the riots happened, I don't know if you agree with this, but the numbers bear it out. Most of the places where the violent riots happened and neighborhoods were burned down were minority neighborhoods. A lot of the protesters were white people coming in from the suburbs and burning down minority neighborhoods. How does that help the black people in the neighborhoods? It doesn't help anybody, especially the black people living in the neighborhoods. That doesn't help. And I guess my third point is there's a very alarming trend in the growth rate of the KKK and white nationalists. It's skyrocketing now. It started going up when Obama took over. It was really low before Obama took over. There was like 6 chapter houses for the KKK in all of the U.S. And then it started slowly creeping back up, and now it's skyrocketing. We're getting more racism, basically, is what I'm saying there. We're doing something wrong in this country. Tom mentioned the BLM movement was one of the biggest we've ever seen, but we have more racism than we've had since Martin Luther King Jr. Something is going wrong. We're doing something wrong. That's my contention.
Okay. So Josh, and your points are supporting that you feel that it did not help the African American community.
Most definitely not.
Movement. Okay. Okay. So I've kind of laid out your broad statements and your broad positions, and let's go to a couple points here. I'll start with one of Ryan's, and here we go. So, can you both agree that the vast majority of BLM protests in 2020 were peaceful?
So I'm going to give a little background here.
Yeah,
Josh.
if you want to clarify that, Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah. So I pulled some data here because I care about data, and this is where I'm starting. And I think, hopefully, Tom, you're seeing why I started here. The Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project. So this is a specific project because the government does not track this stuff, right? So nobody tracks this. It's got to be independent organizations. In conjunction with the Bridging Divides Initiative at Princeton University, collected data on political protests and violence in the U.S. in 2020. In a September 2020 report, which I can put in the notes or whatever for this podcast.
I'm looking at it right now.
Got it. They detailed 10,600 protests following the death of George Floyd on May 25th until August 22nd of 2020. Of those, 10,100 were peaceful with no violence. Not some violence, no violence. And about 80% of them were Black Lives Matter protests, right? Which means fewer than 570 involved any violence, not full-on riots, any violence, which is about 5% of all the protests, which I wanted to make this point, right? And I
relative to the scale of, to an unprecedented size of protests.
Massive protests, right? Millions and millions of people in the streets. 5% of those protests had violence. So can we agree that the vast majority of Black Lives Matter protests in 2020 were peaceful.
Yes, that skates over the obvious facts, but yes, the numbers bear that out.
But it is a fact, right? And this is what I was trying to get at is all the way back when I proposed like doing a podcast and just like having these conversations, I worried that we couldn't agree on facts. 95% of the protests were perfectly peaceful. Nothing violent happened, but all the focus goes on the riots. Right. And that's coming to my later points. So we're going to talk about those later points. But I love the fact that we can just actually agree 95% of the protests were perfectly peaceful.
All right. We have agreement then. Nice.
We agree on a fact. Yes.
Can I respond to that?
Go ahead. Sure.
Okay. So 95% of the protests, the BLM protests, were peaceful. 5% were violent. What percentage of police interactions are peaceful versus police interactions that are violent?
I have no idea. I don't know.
99%. Okay. 99% of police interactions are peaceful. It's less than 1% that turn violent. What started off the whole BLM thing? George Floyd. Well, I mean, the big one in
2020. In
2020 was when George Floyd got killed, right?
Yeah.
So an aberration statistically, if you want to look at it. So I get your take, but look at the opposite side of it. You're saying 5% turned violent. Okay, that's
some violence. I'm not saying they were all riots, and that's the way that they classified
some violence.
Any
violence is not good. We can agree on that. Any violence
absolutely.
Is not good.
Nope. We agree on that.
5% of them turned bad, but less than 1% of police interactions are violent, and that's what we're protesting. Do you see my point?
I don't think that's exactly what they're protesting. I mean, I see your point. So I'm not disagreeing with the point that, like, yeah, generally.
No, I'm not saying that's what they're protesting. That's what really said it.
They're protesting the fact that.
Okay. Anyway, sorry. I broke.
Right. And I want to go back into this again because I'm like, these could be the bloodiest movement that's ever happened in our history, and I that's really aside the point. Like, did it help or not? Because I would argue that the civil rights movement in the 70s, people died, right? Mm-hmm. And I think everyone agrees that helped the African Americans and
absolutely.
Well, absolutely. I would go so far as to say it helped all of the country, not just
it helped the whole world.
Americans.
Yeah, that's a good world.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, we're gonna move on. Josh, okay, your first statement here. Minority neighborhoods are the ones most targeted by BLM riots. Ryan, do you agree? Or Josh, do you need to clarify?
Yeah, Josh, clarify first. Like, give me the background here. What's your big point?
Well, I mean, I looked up some of the numbers, but just look at where the violent riots, and again, there were lots of protests everywhere, but where the violent riots happened, where you saw on the news where neighborhoods were actually burning down, most of those areas, like the vast majority of them, were minority areas, poor areas. Okay, not all of them. How does that help Black people if we're burning down their homes?
So one, again, we're just going to agree on facts, right? That's generally true. I show a video still in my classes, right? My introduction to sociology class about the LA riots following the Rodney King beating, right? And it was actually when when the police officers were acquitted, right? That's when the actual riots happened. Mm-hmm. And same thing. Most of those riots were in South Central Los Angeles, I think is where it was, which are predominantly minority neighborhoods, right? Mm-hmm. Now, in that case, it was a lot of like Asian Americans, which is in the news right now for a variety of reasons, but also predominantly Black communities. And that's where a lot of the damage is. And I totally agree with the general sentiment, which is they're harming themselves when they riot. Yes. I'm not defending the riots.
Let me clarify that.
I'm not defending the riots.
When you say themselves,
alarming video. Sorry, there's an alarming video that circulated, and it was from the LA riots that circulated during the BLM movement of a Black man like screaming at these rioters, saying, "This is my business. This is my home." Yeah. Right? And they're just looting his, and he's like, "I'm with you guys." You know, it's like you're not helping.
It's insane.
Yeah, and it's kind of making your point, Josh, right? That it's because it was very emotional, right, and emotionally stirring. That they're hurt. The riots are happening in vulnerable and a lot of minority communities, right?
And just a quick clarification: Ryan said they're hurting themselves. In a lot of cases, it was white people driving in from outer cities. Not always, but a lot of people showing up because you don't burn down your own neighborhood usually. Some people do. Some people riot or loot the store down the street. But most of these people are not burning down their own city block. This is other people showing up, white people for a lot of them going, I'm going to help these black people by burning down their neighborhood. It doesn't help anybody.
So I think we're in agreement. Can I just throw out just a thought very quickly in response to this?
Sure.
If those protesters who turned rioters went to the poshest neighborhood in town and tried to riot, what do you think the police would do to them?
No, they'd definitely arrest them.
Arrest them or shoot them?
They would probably try to de-escalate the situation as they're trained to do and try to arrest them. If they were violent and they tried to hurt somebody, they'd get shot.
So why do you think they riot in poorer neighborhoods?
Because they can get away with it.
It's a fair point.
You see what I'm saying?
But
so
it's a very fair point.
I'm not disagreeing with your point. I'm saying
I'm not
probably
disagreeing.
a reason why they're rioting where they're rioting.
No, I agree.
They can get away with it.
I agree.
The police officers are like, destroy those stores. Just don't go to the Neiman Marcus and don't go to this store over here, right? Don't go to the really posh neighborhoods.
You're painting on police officers
do,
with a broad racist brush there. That's not helpful. That's not.
But do you see the point, right?
It's a
the
good
general
point.
point is
it's a good valid
there's
point.
a reason why they're rioting where they're rioting.
Yes, it's a good point.
Okay.
But it doesn't help to paint all police officers with.
I'm not trying to say they're all
brush.
No, I'm not trying to say that. I'm saying there's probably a reason why the riots happen.
Agreed. We agree on that.
That's a good point.
Okay. Sub-point.
I think
agreement.
We've got an agreement. We've got
some agreement here.
All right. Okay.
This is sad because we've both just stated facts so far to try to get agreement.
You guys are so you're not very daring. All right. Okay. Ryan. We're going to move over to your statement. Second statement here,
which is just a definition.
Yeah. Can you agree on that? The definition and interpretation of a riot. I'll let Ryan give that definition here.
So I have actually written an introduction to sociology textbook, and in that book, there's a chapter called collective behavior, and we cover riots in there, right? So I'm literally quoting from that chapter I wrote that the definition of a riot is, quote, a form of civil disorder characterized by disorganized groups lashing out in a sudden and intense rash of violence, vandalism, or other crime, end quote. So that's the definition of a riot, right? Disorganized groups of people lashing out suddenly in violence, vandalism, or crime. There's some core components of the definition. First, it's more than one person. So if one person participating in a protest that is otherwise peaceful smashes a window, that is not a riot. It's violence. I'm conceding that it's violence. It's vandalism. It's criminal. It's not a riot because it's one person, okay? And we have lots of evidence that that's exactly what happened during some of these protests, is specifically some of the people you're talking about, Josh, people who drove in from the suburbs, right, came in to participate in one of these protests. I still remember the video, right? There was a kid who grabbed a skateboard and started smashing windows here in St. Pete, and a bunch of the protesters grabbed the dude and threw him to the ground and are like, you're not helping the cause. That's not a riot, okay? That's violence. The second piece is what they're doing has to be violent and or criminal. Yelling at police officers or setting off fireworks during a protest is not a riot, okay? So all I'm looking for here is that we can agree on the definition and interpretation of a riot, that it's got to be more than one person engaging in violence or criminal behavior in a disorganized fashion. That's the definition. Can we agree on the definition?
Go ahead.
No. Yeah. Of course.
Thank you. That's all I was trying to reach for, is like, this is what a riot is.
But why?
You do not agree.
No, he does agree.
No,
right?
I was joking.
Right.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, but Ryan, and can I say the subtext of your point is that maybe some of these riots were being mischaracterized?
Absolutely. That when you have, just like I said, I mean, literally this happened in St. Pete, right? I live in the broader metropolitan area of Tampa, St. Pete, Clearwater. There were Black Lives Matter protests, marches every day for months. And occasionally you would get one Yahoo, right, who would show up and is like, let's tear this stuff down, right? And it was the Black protesters who would tackle these guys and be like, stop it. Don't do this. And I don't know how many of those got classified as violent because one jerk pulled out their skateboard or pulled out whatever they did, right? And one of them was an umbrella and started smashing windows. So let's be clear, right? When we say there were riots, I'm not denying that there were riots. There was a riot here in Tampa, and I'll talk about that here in a second, right? But there were riots. I get that. How many of these protests were actually riots versus one or two yahoos are like, yeah, let's go crazy and try and, start something? Some of them were actually invading this. And I don't want to get into the whole kind of, there's a lot of conspiracy theories about that, but some of them were invading. There were members of the Aryan Nation doing this, right? Like that's been documented, but fine, let's leave that. Let's just make sure that we're putting into context that most of these protests were peaceful. Very few actually meet the criteria of riots.
But where do you draw your line on this number of people? If this number of people are killed, then this thing's not worth it. Or if this amount of property damage is done, then this thing is not worth it. Where do you draw your line? Because you're
I think we agree.
Apologizing for for the violence that did happen.
No. We agree, Josh. We already agreed on this. Any violence is bad.
Okay,
that's my line. That's my line.
Why do you keep? You're walking this line that let's not be too critical of the movement because there was some violence, but there was a lot of not violence. Well, okay, but how much violence is too much violence?
Any violence is too much violence.
So it's 5% too much. You agree with me that this thing doesn't work?
No,
that's what you just said.
That.
You said any violence is too much.
Any violence is too much. You're assuming
there was violence.
The purpose of the Black Lives Matter movement was like to engage in violence.
Clearly,
that's not the case.
I'm not
95% of what they're doing is peaceful protests.
Sure.
95%. And even when there is violence, it's one or two individuals most of the time. And then occasionally you get riots. Okay. Everybody who is a public figure is basically saying, don't riot. Don't do that. That does not help the movement. They're admitting it doesn't help the movement.
I can't agree with that statement.
That's fine. We'll get to my last point and then the last one.
Yeah, what's interesting is I've heard from both sides, like like the Capitol riot, of moles being planted, right? I hear this a lot, right, from both sides, being like, hey, there was a guy, there's an Aryan guy in the BLM movement, and then there were Antifa in the Capitol riots that were instigating things, and I think and this stuff's really hard to prove, right? But it's hard to classify that. All right, I'm going to move on to Josh's second statement. Okay, white supremacists and the KKK are growing at an alarming rate. Josh, clarification?
Well, I kind of talked about that earlier. We can agree that that's a problem, right?
Yeah, I would really like to see the numbers. So I'm not disagreeing with you. I don't know the numbers. I'm just genuinely admitting, I don't know the numbers to that. But if that is the case, alarming, disturbing, I don't like that. I think that's terrible.
Yeah, and you're saying, Josh, this is a reaction to the Black Lives Matter movement and to Black activism in general.
That alone, I think, would be a great podcast to talk about, because I don't know what else it could be. Like I said, the numbers that I looked at, and I didn't bring them for this debate. I probably should have, because I didn't think we'd spend a lot of time talking about this. But white nationalism and racism were on the decline. Okay, when we grew up, it wasn't a big deal for you guys. I never dealt with it, never worried about it. And Ryan will go back into critical race theory, and that's because I'm racist and I'm white privileged.
No. I'm actually not going to say that. I absolutely will not say that.
Because
keep in mind where we grew up.
No, I agree.
We grew up in Morgan, that is like 99.99% white people.
Sure.
Well, you're not going to see racism.
It's not quite that high. It never was quite that really high. I had black friends growing up.
What?
Yeah.
But it was predominantly white.
It was very predominantly white.
For sure.
Are I mean, we can name the 2 black kids in our high school.
The
Tom,
one
right?
kid,
Like,
Danny Ovard.
and Melissa, his sister, right?
His
There were
sister.
2. It was
Yeah.
Danny and Melissa Ovard, right? And they
Yeah.
were adopted by a
one
white
family.
family. That's
Mhm.
it.
Well, no,
Right?
My friends were adopted by a white family too.
So
I was friends with 2 brothers.
come on. In our entire county of
No, it was
11,000 people, we're
predominantly-
talking about like
we're in
5
agreement.
people.
Sure. But you know, in the news,
I didn't read the news when I was young. So I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm not saying that I'm not disagreeing with anything. I'm saying we probably were completely unaware of how bad
Absolutely.
things were because
Absolutely.
we lived in an almost exclusively white enclave.
And
We
in
just didn't
talking to so Ryan and I have a brother-in-law named Mario. He's half Argentine. He grew up in Morgan, and
it was not easy.
he talked about instances of racism that he had to deal with. Okay,
Yep.
So fair point. There probably was some racism that I wasn't aware of, no doubt about it. But my overall point, and maybe you disagree, racism is making a comeback, and it has been for a while. And but the numbers bear that out. The KKK is growing. The KKK. I pulled up an article a minute ago. The KKK is blowing up in Germany. How bizarre is that?
I have read about that.
Yeah. So racism is on the increase. We're doing something wrong, and I don't know if I can lay the full blame of that on BLM. I don't think I can, but I don't think it's helping when you're shoving critical race theory down people's throat, and that's all we hear about. People get sick of it, and when you're doing it in the name of equality and Black Lives Matter, where are people going to go?
Sorry, what is critical race theory? What is that? Just give
Ryan, you want to tackle that? That's more your thing.
I know it is, but I don't really want to tackle it. Can we do that in another episode?
Okay. All right.
Which is the problem with it? We can't even talk about
like
it.
we
People
can.
get worried.
It's not that I'm even worried about that. It's just
now.
a big issue. That's a really big issue. And
Agreed.
the only thing that I would add to that. So I'm absolutely in agreement. Like if the KKK are growing, which I think there might be some truth to that. I think it's just that they're more vocal. I think they've always been there.
No, they're growing. They're growing.
I would attribute it to something completely different, and certainly not the Black Lives Matter movement. I'd say it's growing nationalism and fascism would be my take on it, and that it was completely
a lot of
validated.
the articles that talk about it growing say it's all Trump's fault.
Well,
but it's funny because it started growing under Obama, and they're not saying it's Obama's fault.
No, I wouldn't attribute it. I would say that Trump is actually a symptom, not a cause. And all he did is validated it. Right? But we could have
get
that
into
debate
that,
in another one,
which would be interesting.
Yeah.
But my overall point is, racism is on the rise again, and that's not
certainly
good.
more vocal. Yeah, and I would agree. I think we're in agreement on that.
Agreement.
Yeah, and we're agreeing that, like, because I don't think you were saying that the BLM is causing white supremacy in the KKK, but like they're both kind of symptoms of some kind of racial divide.
That's probably a better way to put it. I like that, Tom. That's probably a better way to put it.
Okay, cool. Okay, good. We're great. We're doing pretty well. Of course,
we've agreed on everything so far.
These are pretty safe statements, everybody. So, okay. All right, Ryan, do you want to give? Let's see. We're going to move on to your third fact. Point. All right.
I went super safe, Tom. Come on.
Lame. All right.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
But this one is a little bit. It's not entirely a fact, but it is. I mean, it's kind of. So returning to my first point, I live in Tampa. We actually had a riot here. Right. It was really just one night coming out of, right after George Floyd's death. What happened? And it was actually right by USF where my wife works. Right. A couple of businesses were burned and storefronts were smashed. Got it. There were also, of course, hundreds of Black Lives Matter protests in the surrounding area. Almost all of them were peaceful with virtually no violence. Which of those made the front page of the local paper? The riot did. The riot was all over the paper. And in all of the local newscasts, right, the riot was huge. The daily Black Lives Matter march that they had in St. Pete to City Hall, right, that almost never made the paper. I mean, it was just not that interesting.
So you're saying the media is corrupt. Agreed.
Okay. I know you're going to agree with this, but let me finish because this is important, right? My point here is that the media, and I primarily mean mainstream media like TV news and newspapers, focus on events that scare people, okay? Media coverage of COVID is what really drove this home for me, but media coverage of the 5% of racial protests that turned violent during 2020 far outstripped media coverage of the 95% of peaceful protests.
Why would that be surprising to you?
But for some reasons, right? But there is research that backs up the mainstream media is biased on this. And I'm just going to give one quick quote that I think is interesting. We'll see if you actually agree with this. So this is from the author of the article that I was pulling from, Summer Harlow, who said, quote, "The typical pattern in media coverage of protests is this: the more radical protesters' tactics, or the more their aims challenge the status quo, the more delegitimizing the coverage is. Thus, conservative protests tend to receive more favorable coverage than protests seeking radical change, such as Black Lives Matter and anti-racism protests," end quote. Now, keep in mind, I don't think that actually applies to the January 6th, the riot at the Capitol, right? Because that was completely delegitimized by all the media, right? Like all the media was like, no. But that's the general point that the author is trying to make. So I don't know if you would fully agree with that. Right. I don't know that you'd fully agree with that statement, but here's the statement that I want to kind of focus on. Can we agree that the media focused disproportionately on violence during protests relative to its frequency during the anti-racism protests in 2020?
Of course, that's what the media does. That's what all big media does. I was talking to my buddy who's an engineer, and he was explaining to me the algorithms now used by Facebook and YouTube and all the big media, that all that they put on your feed are stuff that you absolutely agree with or stuff that you hate and will scare you and make you insanely mad. That's it. That's the algorithm. So of course that's what the media did. So yeah, we agree with that. That's all we see now. We're catered to our echo chambers or our fears. That's the media.
So if that's the case, right? And I love that we agree, because I thought we would agree on this, right? Do you think the media coverage could have led to people thinking that the Black Lives Matter movement was really violent, right? Much more violent than it actually is, and that it was actually causing more harm than it actually is?
No, yes, no, because you had three questions there. Yeah, I the perception obviously is that it was more violent than it actually was. Oh, sorry. So yeah, that's the perception. I agree with that. But again, you gloss over the fact that there was a ton of violence. People died. Neighborhoods were burned down. There were millions of dollars of property damage. Mm-hmm. They took over a whole 5 city blocks
in Seattle.
Seattle.
Yep.
So you can't gloss over that stuff.
I'm not glossing over any of that.
Skating around it and saying, well, it wasn't as bad as it was portrayed.
No.
Okay, agreed. But it was still really freaking bad. A lot of bad things happened. A lot of people died.
A lot. I mean, more than obviously should have, which is zero. None should have died. So I will absolutely concede all of that. Certainly there were riots. It was bad. I'm not defending any of the violence. Absolutely not. I'm not defending any of the violence.
You keep skating right around it.
No, I'm trying to minimize it, because people tend to focus on the violence when there is all of this good stuff that's actually happening. And that's my point. 95% of the protests, completely peaceful. There were actual changes to policing.
That's such a weird,
I think you totally agree with
idea that you're running with there. The greater good. We can sacrifice a few.
Can I add one last thing that I think is actually stunningly. Tell me no.
Put down your foot.
It's super short, but I think is stunningly telling of how successful Black Lives Matter is. In all of this conversation today, no one has said, we're not sure if Derek Chauvin killed George Floyd. We all just automatically assume, yeah, he killed him, right?
Yeah. And I don't think
it's murder. We all agree he murdered George Floyd, right? Because we all saw the video. Our language about police officers killing unarmed black men has changed. And I would attribute a lot of that to the anti-racist movement in the US, a big part of that Black Lives Matter, that the language we use now is that we talk about police officers murdering people. We never used to do that.
Let me counter that.
Well, we don't really know. It's under trial.
Hang on. This leads right into Josh's third point. So let's get that point out, and then we can discuss it. So,
sure.
Josh, I'm going to say it, and then you add your clarification to it and any points you want to make.
Okay.
The third last point is the defund the police movement led to an increase in violent crimes in many cities. Josh?
I don't even want to talk about that. I want to rebut what Ryan just said.
But I think it's related, right?
It is related. And this goes back to what I said. Police officers don't have enough training. Okay. We saw that with Derek Chauvin. You don't kneel on somebody's neck for 9 minutes and expect a good outcome. Okay. That dude was not trained properly, because anybody with any kind of combat training should understand you don't kneel on somebody's neck. Right? You agree with that? Police generally don't have enough training.
That I'll agree with. The specific Derek Chauvin thing, no, I don't, because he actually has de-escalated in other instances.
Okay,
right?
So let me hit you with this.
So that's more complicated.
Because this goes right to what you just said. When that happened, when George Floyd was killed and everybody saw the video, the country was basically split 50-50, right? You had the progressives saying, oh, Derek Chauvin's a murderer, and you had the Republicans going, oh, George Floyd should have died. Yay, right? No, that's not what happened.
I don't think
everybody in the freaking country said he killed him. I mean, it's black and white. There might be 3 hillbillies in a bunker somewhere in Alabama scratching their belly buttons going, I'm glad George Floyd's dead. Everybody else in the country looked at the video and said, yeah, he killed him. Everybody agreed, right? I don't know a single person that said, oh, Derek Chauvin, he was justified. Nobody said that. Everybody said Derek Chauvin killed him.
It was egregiously mishandled.
Yes, everybody did. The left, the right, the middle, the moderates, libertarians, everybody agreed that Derek Chauvin shouldn't have done what he did, that was murder. Everybody agreed that was bad. But for some reason, we still had these crazy riots. And you know, what you just said, it changed the language? I don't think so. Everybody agreed that this was bad. We shouldn't have had the protests erupt from this, because who were they protesting? Everybody agreed. Do you agree with that? Do you know a single person that said he was justified in doing what he did and that George Floyd should have died? Do you know a single person, or have you heard a single media personality or politician say, yes, that was good?
And well, can I say that if you look at the LA riots, the riots didn't happen until the police officers were acquitted, right?
Yeah. Right.
And I think this is more, because it's all justice for George Floyd, right? And they're wanting the officers to be appropriately punished for their mishandling, right? And then that's did they have enough training? Was he following the correct procedures, right? And it's broken down, and that's still ongoing. But that's sort of, I think that's the crux of it, right? Because everyone knows he did something wrong. It's just a matter of who's to blame.
But so is it Derek Chauvin is just a racist piece of crap and he did something stupid, or was he not trained properly? Is that what you're saying?
Right. Yeah, and then is it the police department? Do they need more funding, right? And which is sort of your point, or is there just bad cops and we need to weed them out? What?
In this case, it could be Derek Chauvin's a racist piece of crap. I don't actually know, but the point is, everybody agreed what he did was bad. So I don't think it has changed. I mean, maybe Ryan's right. Maybe the language has changed, but I just don't see it, because everybody agreed that what he did was stupid. What he did was criminal.
Yeah. So I'm agreeing with almost everything you're saying, right? Where I would add the nuance, right, is if we go back to what happened just outside of St. Louis, right? And I'm forgetting the person who was actually killed in that instance, right, by a police officer. And I should remember his name, but I'm forgetting it, and I apologize for that. But
somebody's going to protest you for forgetting that name.
Maybe. I don't know. That was 6 years ago, right? The police officer in that case was not acquitted, was not convicted. And he killed somebody. That was 6 years ago, right? Okay. Granted, we didn't have video footage, right? So we didn't literally have video footage of the police officer killing him, right? And so all I'm saying is, I think the movement has actually been effective in changing the way we think about the language and how we think about what happens with police officers. Whenever this happens, immediately police officers are put on leave. And now If it's pretty clear that what they did was completely wrong, right? Shooting a guy in the back when he's trying to get in his car, right? Now that one's complicated. I get some of these are really complicated cases, and I'm not trying to say that it's easy black and white stuff. But pretty quickly now, I think the language has changed to police officers are killing people, not, hey, let's wait to see, right? And I would say that this is as a direct result of the movement saying Black Lives Matter, police officers have to stop killing unarmed black men, right? That's the point of the movement.
You're assuming
and I think it's being effective because look at the way we talk about this. Now, again, the Derek Chauvin case is just so obvious, right? They've had the hardest time finding a jury for this because everybody's seen the video. The video is heart-wrenching. It's horrific. There's nothing good about that video, right? And it's so obvious that what he's doing is killing this guy, right? And I would actually go so far as to like almost, I'm not defending Derek Chauvin, but to say, I kind of see like the one point that they've made, which is the police officers felt threatened. And so they didn't do anything to stop the situation, right? And that's probably a little bit true. I'm not defending what he did by any stretch of imagination. What he did was wrong, but they were surrounded by people who were yelling at them saying, stop what you're doing. And of course they didn't stop, but they felt threatened. Okay, that complicates it just a little bit. They still killed the guy, right? It was over a $20 bill, right? That's the life. That's, if we want to say Black Lives Matter, do they matter more than a $20 bill, right? Like that's ultimately the argument about George Floyd. He was killed over a $20 bill.
Well, you're the king of nuance, and you're skipping over all sorts of stuff there. We don't need to go into it, but that's not what the argument is.
Keep us on track, Tom. I'm
sorry. Let's bring it in here, and so I'll basically give a rundown. So I think we have had some agreement. That's good. We feel like the riots have been negative for minority communities, right? So that they've damaged those areas and have affected them negatively. And then like nationalism and white supremacy seem to be on the rise, and this is sort of part of a big racial divide, and those aren't good. We're also agreeing that there was some skewing of how the protests and riots were portrayed by the media, and that and could be mischaracterized and blown out of proportion, and we're agreeing on that. But I don't think anyone ultimately answered the big question of whether it was good for African Americans or not, the BLM movement and riots. But we're out of time, but we had some good conversation, good debate about it, and so that was enjoyable. There's a lot of stuff we cracked open that I'd love to talk about more, but we'll have to leave it for now. So thanks, everybody.
Yeah, Tom.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Finding Common Battlegrounds. The music is by Ben Sound. The views expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and not those of their employers. For more information or more episodes, you can find us at findingcommonbattlegrounds.com.